Good morning, Penn State fans. This is the Blue White Breakdown. Max Ralph, Johnny McGonigal from PennLive. Hope y'all have had a great week here. This is Wednesday, February 5th for us. We're recording this, doing a little bit of a Jim Knowles recap. Johnny, yeah, meaning me and Bob, were in State College for the Jim Knowles presser. You joined us on Zoom, but Bob and I shared our reactions a little bit on Tuesday right after it happened, and wanted to hop on this pod, dive into it a little bit deeper because I thought we both thought he was really fascinating on Tuesday. I thought it was a presser that had a lot of info in it that is worth rehashing, and a lot of personality that he showed despite being a little bit soft spoken. So Johnny, want to turn it over to you here. I know it's a big week for you, and I hope all is well, and wondering what your initial reactions were from Jim Knowles.
Yeah, Max, I'm gearing up for Sunday. Looking forward
Yeah.
to being at Chickies and Pete's in South Philly. If any listeners or watchers are also there, I'll be the one standing on the booth. No, I'm kidding. But no, looking forward to Sunday. But obviously, had to hop on Zoom, and you guys were up there in State College, and for a big day, Jim Knowles getting introduced as Penn State's defensive coordinator. We talked last week and have written a lot, about how big of a
Mhm.
deal this is for Penn State, for Jim Knowles, for the 2025 season, for what this means for this program, what it kind of stands for, if you want to kind of get more big picture, which is kind of where I my main takeaway was. And it's not anything that's surprising necessarily, but, I asked Jim Knowles, I asked him how integral and how he would describe James Franklin and Pat Kraft during the hiring process. And what he said is they want to win. They've made it very clear they want to win, and excuse me, they'll do whatever it takes to win. And in Jim Knowles' case, that means shelling out an average of 3.1 million base salary per year over a 3-year deal. That's a statement of intent. But for Jim Knowles to understand too that like this program means business. This coach James Franklin means business. This athletic director Pat Kraft means business. He said that James Franklin was the one who spearheaded everything, but he knew that Pat Kraft was in the background, providing support and providing ultimately whatever Penn State needed to get the job done in securing Jim Knowles from Ohio State off the back of a national championship. So that was a big takeaway for me, but there was obviously a lot to dive into as well.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of the point that Penn State is doing everything to win right now, and is willing to. I think the very last question Knowles answered was, why is now the time, or like why is this team the one you want to join? And he almost, Bob said it in our video yesterday, but he almost blurted the answer out before like the question was finished. He's like, it's just so close. Like it is so close here, and I feel like I can help. And so I think what you're getting in Jim Knowles is not only obviously one of, if not the best defensive coordinators in college football, but it's a guy who knows what it takes to win, literally just did it at the highest level last year, who has been around the game, who has familiarity with, the Big Ten, with the national stage. And if he's saying that, like that's not BS. Like he's not a guy who's going to sit up there and sugarcoat anything. And I felt that in his press conference on Tuesday. I just thought that I thought he was a straight shooter. I really did. He cracked a few jokes, but they were few and far between. And he wasn't up there. He wasn't just. He said great things about Penn State and James Franklin, but it wasn't just showering praise in an unnecessary way. Like he really seems like a guy who's not going to sugarcoat anything, and it also seems like it's going to translate over to what he does with the team specifically, which I know that people appreciate, athletes appreciate, and I think when you hear him say this team is so close to winning a national championship, and I think I can help. I think that fans should take note of that. I think that's a really interesting way for him to have ended his introduction at Penn State.
Yeah, and this isn't talking about it not being blowing smoke. Like this is a guy who went up against Penn State last year. This is a guy who
Yeah.
has coached in the Big Ten the last 3 years. This is a guy who has been approached by James Franklin in the past and has a familiarity with this program. He has a familiarity with James Franklin. He has a familiarity with what Franklin has built in Happy Valley over the last 11 seasons and coming so close, a few plays, a few points away against Notre Dame from playing in that national championship. Everyone in the country understood how close Penn State was, but Jim Knowles has a different perspective on it on a multiple fronts, really. A part of that too is the draw back to Penn State. He mentioned it, him being a Philly guy, and I think maybe the 3.1 million might be a bigger draw than him being a Philadelphia native and a St. Joe's Prep alum,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there's still something to be said about that. There's still something to be said about that. You mentioned him being kind of a no nonsense guy, straightforward, no frills. That's what I got from Rich Gannon, the former NFL MVP quarterback who was St. Joe's Prep's quarterback when Jim Knowles was a center and linebacker there back in the 80s, and they've remained very good friends over the years. I talked to him for a story on PennLive, which posted last week. If you guys haven't read that yet, go check that out. But some really good stuff from Rich. But he was just saying like he cares about his players. He's no nonsense. He's gonna the reputation of him being a lock himself in the room all week and come up with a mad scientist game plan is accurate. That's the way he operates. But so he is a guy who is going to have a lot of autonomy, at Penn State, which maybe that autonomy didn't exist or was lessened at Ohio State. There was some reporting out there from CBS Sports that mid-season Ryan Day started sitting in on a lot of meetings and started questioning things. And so I think Jim Knowles is going to have autonomy here at Penn State. And, with that being said, too, he's going to have a really strong assistant coach staff to work with, guys who are in place and not leaving. Poindexter, Terry Smith, Deion Barnes, the list goes on. And so this is just a really good situation. And I wasn't necessarily surprised with what he said or how he handled himself, at his press
Yeah.
conference.
Yeah. Johnny, you spearheaded by far the best follow up coverage of Jim Knowles and the hiring at Penn State last week. If any of you listeners missed what Johnny did on Penn Live last week, make sure you check it out because he covered everything with the Philly angle on it. Whether it was Rich Gannon, some recruiting stuff, Cam Smith at St. Joe's Prep, the signee who's coming in. I mean, every Philly angle there was, it was hit. So good work there. You mentioned the autonomy, and that was something that I had said briefly with Bob on Tuesday. But I really do. I got the sense that Jim Knowles is going to have a little more say than Tom Allen and Manny Diaz did when they got here. That's not to say that James Franklin's non-negotiables that he always talks about aren't still in place. I mean, obviously it's a 4-2-5, 4-3 base, whatever you want to call it. Jim Knowles is running the same base defense as the three guys who have been here before him. But I think that he's going to be able to do more things that he wants to do than the other guys might have. I mean, that's like again, it's not saying that Manny Diaz and Tom Allen were completely restricted by James Franklin. That's not the case. They had creative blitz packages. They did a lot of good things, but there were key parts to defense that James Franklin wanted in place. And those still exist, but I think it's going to be more of an open dialogue with Knowles because let's be real. You're not paying the guy $3.1 million a year if you're not going to let him do his thing. I mean, it's just like that's part of it. I wrote a little bit more in depth this morning on Penn Live about the transition. I thought Knowles said a lot of really fascinating things about what it's going to take to install his defense here. He called it kind of an excruciating process because there is such a foundation of defense here at Penn State already, but there's a lot of things that he wants to bring over. I mean, if you think about it, when he was at Ohio State, he completely overhauled what they did on defense in order to get to this national championship team. And that doesn't have to happen at Penn State, but he has things he wants to do. Maybe it's the jack position that he didn't run a whole lot at Ohio State, but is maybe a little bit similar to what Penn State was doing with the Lion before KJ Winston got hurt. He's got to figure out if there are names that can do that at Penn State. He's got to figure out what he has on defense. He hardly knows these guys right now. It's a matter of scouting. It's a matter of learning verbiage. It's a matter of collaborating with assistants to figure out what's worked, what he can bring in that has worked for him. There's a lot that goes into this process, and those assistant coaches specifically. He made a really good point. When you go through four defensive coordinators in a span of 5 years, and you still have top 10 defenses every single year, it's because you got a great group of assistants that are kind of running the ship for Penn State. And if you look at it, Brent Pryce last year was in 21. Terry Smith, Anthony Poindexter, Dion Barnes have all been on staff since then. Barnes was a grad assistant back then. But then Dan Connor joined as an analyst in 2022. He's now the de facto linebackers coach, even though there hasn't been an official move made. Those guys have been there through all of these defensive regimes. And so, not a lot is going to change. I think Jim Knowles he's going to have some freedom. Not a lot is going to change, but he's going to have freedom. And it's going to be interesting to see how this goes over the next few months.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, those assistant coaches being in place, that helps with institutional knowledge. That helps on the recruiting trail when, the position coaches are out and about, in living rooms in high schools, because while Jim Knowles, is certainly brings a lot of cachet and the resume and guys want to play for him, I think he's going to be probably more of a closer on the recruiting trail. Like, hey, put in the legwork.
Yeah.
Dion Barnes and Kenny Sanders, the player personnel guys, bring them to State College and have them come talk to me, and we'll break the film down, and we'll break everything down. Like there was a story out there. I apologize, I forget which outlet put it out there, or even if it was an interview that they did with the media. But Caleb Downs, the safety from Ohio State who transferred from Alabama, the story was that basically he came to Ohio State and he like locked himself in a room with Jim Knowles, and they just talked ball the entire time. He wanted to know how he fit in that defense, and he was a high profile player, deciding where he would play the rest of his college career and before being a top 10 pick in the NFL. I could see Jim Knowles being that kind of guy in recruiting, whether that's in the portal or whether that's the high school recruiting. But those assistants are big in terms of also helping him understand who he has and who he doesn't have, what he's working with and what he's not working with. At Ohio State, um, there was some reported push and pull between Larry Johnson, their defensive line coach, who was previously at Penn State, over a 3-man front or a 4-man front. Larry Johnson preferred a 4-man front. Jim Knowles in the past has utilized a 3-man front a lot more, and he didn't do that as much at Ohio State. I'm interested to see if he implements that at Penn State. And again, that's going to depend on what Penn State has up front, what they have at linebacker, what they have in the secondary, and in terms of those hybrid pieces that can or could not be used. The autonomy bit is really interesting to me because Max, you talked about Tom Allen, Manny Diaz, former head coaches as defensive coordinators, and but they came really off the back of being head coaches. Tom Allen in Indiana getting fired and Manny Diaz getting fired or let go at Miami. Jim Knowles is a former head coach. He coached for a good amount of time at Cornell, and then he started working his way up the assistant ranks and the defensive coordinator ranks. And so he has that experience, though. Like he has the experience over the past decade plus, past 2 decades, really, of being the head coach of the defense, which is what James Franklin. That's a phrase that's come up over the years, and what James is looking for in a defensive coordinator. So, I mean, look, the results speak for itself. The resume speaks for itself, and the guy spoke for himself yesterday. And I gotta say, like, just looking at it from like a neutral kind of view, I liked what he said. I'm on board with him. It's easy to be on board with, the highest paid defensive coordinator and the guy who orchestrated the number one defense in the country last year. But I'm on board.
Me too. I think everything he said made sense, and there's a long road between winning a press conference and winning football games. But I definitely think Jim Knowles was impressive in his messaging. I think he's a soft-spoken guy. We talked about the no nonsense kind of way of with the way that he has, but he is a soft-spoken guy. He's not this big hulking guy either. Like he's just a football guy, Like he's just a football guy. He's been doing it for a long time. He's done it at a high level, and everything he said on Tuesday, yesterday, made me confident that the same thing is going to continue to happen at Penn State. I'm curious, whenever the next time we hear from James Franklin is to hear a little bit more about this recruitment process and going to get him and everything. But I think Penn State's in good hands right now for a little bit of the nuts and bolts of Jim Knowles' presser. He said that I guess he didn't like outright say he was going to coach from the press box, but he basically said that's what he's done most recently. He's done both over his career, but most recently in the press box, and thinks that that's the best place for him to take emotion out of the game, out of the way he calls a game. Best place to see the whole entire field, call the defense. So, considering the whole situation with James Franklin kind of banishing Tom Allen to the press box last year, I'm gonna take a wild guess and say Knowles will be in the box coaching, which I mean I have to agree. I mean I think calling an offense or a defense from the booth is the best way to do it, especially since, like Knowles said, with the in helmet communication, with the iPads on the sideline, whatever you want to call it. There is more connection down to the players still. So that was really the biggest newsy thing I'd say. But yeah, I think it makes sense to continue coaching from the box for Knowles, and I do think that Franklin will be happy to have that.
One thing to add there, Max, because I think we've covered. I think we've covered most of it. First of all, I agree with the Booth thing. I've never called a defense. I've never called an offense, but it makes a hell of a lot of sense to sit up top and see what's going on as opposed to being field level. And I mean, we've both been field level before. It's kind of hard, to
Yeah.
kind of get your bearings a little bit. I mean, it
Yes.
makes it makes a whole hell of a lot of sense to sit up top. There's a reason why the ESPN guys like Herb Street, Fowler, and all them. That's why they're not court like field side, like basketball court side, like they're up top so they can see what's going on too, right? It just makes sense. One thing I want to add though, you said he's not a hulking guy, and Hulk made me think of Marvel. And when the rumblings started to first come out about Jim Knowles, a thought crossed my mind. I'm just like, he looks like Jeff Bridges in Iron Man, the Obadiah Stane, which is a terrible name, by the way. I don't want to associate Jim Knowles with the name Obadiah Stane. But if anyone knows what I'm talking about, you get it. If you don't, just look up Jeff Bridges Iron Man, and I think there's some similarities there. Although Tony Stark had to build it, with a bunch of scraps in a cave. Jim Knowles will not have to build Penn State's defense with a bunch of scraps. They've got a lot of talent. So that's my little tie-in. That didn't come off as cleanly as I thought it was going to be, but
It'd
it is
be
what
a
it
it'd
is.
be an interesting No, the point got across. It was really good, and the tweet was awesome when you made it. And like, honestly, he really does look like Jeff Bridges' character. You're absolutely right. But it'd be a fun thought experiment to decide who the core reactor of Penn State's defense is, for the 2025 season. But no, we can save Johnny. We'll save our Marvel discussion podcast for the summer when guys aren't doing introductory press conferences, and we don't have a little more stuff on our plate. But I'm with you. I think we hit everything with Knowles. Bottom line, I think we're both in agreement. Impressive introductory press conference, and like, yeah, he's been doing it long enough. It should be impressive, but it was beyond just his personality, the way he carries himself. It was, he talked about some nuts and bolts of what defense looks like, what installing a defense looks like, and why he thinks this Penn State team is a place where he can succeed. And of course, fans are going to love the idea that he's from Philly, grew up a Penn State fan. He made mention of the fact that his high school coaches used to roll up their pants like Joe Paterno and come to practice straight from work. So, he had some fan service moments too, like
Oh yeah.
Jim knew what he was doing, but I really think it was a good press conference. I'm excited to see what he brings through spring ball and through the years that he's here. I think we're only 11 plus weeks away from the blue white game. So be able to see Jim Knowles in action pretty soon.